You have any questions before we begin?
No, I'll leave the questions to you. Were you nervous about shooting the pilot, thinking like, this is my opportunity now to be a director?
Yeah, sure I was nervous, yeah. I mean, I had directed some before that, but yeah, I was very nervous. I depended on Alex Sakharov a lot, DP.
I remember it was the first or second week of prep on the pilot. David would walk into the office, put his feet up, look out the window, and just like gray mood. He'd go like, Dave, what's up? Like, I don't know who's gonna fucking watch this shit.
Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman. This is another episode of Westdoc Online. Today we have a fabulous episode with Alex Gibney, who has directed dozens of award-winning documentaries, I'm sure some of which you have seen, and the show today is Wise Guy, David Chase and the Sopranos. And we're going to get to it in just a moment, but I just want to remind you before we begin, we're brought to you in part by Real Screen. Real Screen Summit is coming up in February in Miami this year, February 3rd to 5th. Be there, be square. It's all the buyers and sellers in the nonfiction world. And go to our website, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see a link you can click on and get all the information. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Good, Chuck. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you speaking from?
New York.
Where are you? In your office in New York?
Indeed.
So this is a pretty unusual show for you in a way, because it's a show about another show, right?
That's true. I haven't done a show about another show before.
And how did this come about? Did HBO approach you? Did you approach
HBO
them?
did approach me. And initially, I mean, they said, do you want to do something about The Sopranos? And I have to say that initially, while I loved the show and was sort of intrigued, still, I really didn't want to do a show that kind of was a stone-skipping exercise of greatest hits from the episodes. It seemed like anybody could do that. What do you need me for? And if that's all it is, just watch the show. But I thought about it, and then I said, well, let me go have lunch with David Chase. So I reached out to him, and we agreed to have lunch at a restaurant in Santa Monica. I just found him to be a fascinating character, full of contradictions, both kind of off-putting and occasionally churlish, but very funny and charming and also warm. And also he had a story to tell, which was how the show came to be. And that was an interesting story that seemed to have a lot of present-day relevance, because his pursuit of a personal story that was very idiosyncratic was, shall we say, not embraced by the industry at the time. And I would say the industry at the time now is also somewhat inhospitable to that kind of personal creative vision, right? So it seemed like a moment from the past that had a lot of resonance in the present. So I dug in.
Did you know David before?
I did not. Didn't know him at all.
There's a moment in the show, I think it's in part one, this is a two-part series, where David looks at you and says something like, I didn't know this show was going to be as much about me, or something to that effect. Did he realize that it was his name in the title?
Well,
I
didn't have a title yet, but we had discussed that I was interested in him, but I think he thought it was going to be mostly about The Sopranos. Clearly, that's what he thought. And we went and built this set that was an homage to Melfi's office, and I played Melfi to David's Tony, and we. The plan was to record an interview over 3 days in that office, in that kind of therapeutic setting. the first morning focused almost entirely on David's personal life. I didn't ask any questions relating to The Sopranos, and it was a perfectly convivial conversation, and we include a lot of it we include bits and pieces of it in the film. But at some point, he said, I'm increasingly uncomfortable with this. You've been asking me a lot of personal questions. I'm not sure. I thought this was going to be about The Sopranos. I have half a mind to leave. He was going to leave, get up and leave, and that was going to be it. And I was going to be left with an empty set and no main character. So I think that that was a very much of an interesting moment, because had I not convinced him to leave, and had I not convinced him to stay, and had he not been generous enough to do so, I don't know what I would have done. But I think that was also part of the therapeutic process. In other words, in therapy, you get off on talking about yourself, and suddenly it's enormously satisfying. But then there comes a moment where you're thinking, like, why am I telling all this stuff to this person? And what is this person doing? And who are they really in my life? And was this about me, or is this about something else? So all those questions came up. And unexpectedly, but in a way that showed that we were getting someplace, is what I would say if I had my therapist hat on. And luckily, we were able to continue.
Let's take a look at the trailer.
For years, everybody told me you should write a show about your mother and yourself. She was so out there.
Stop telling me how to live my life. You just shut up.
And I thought, who's going to watch that?
You're making me out to be some fucking mama's boy.
Then I realized maybe if he was like a really badass guy.
So what happened with you and The Sopranos is like HBO said, go for it, man.
Well, nobody else wanted it.
David was a TV veteran, but hadn't really directed.
I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew it was going to be about money and death.
Could you have a killer as your lead?
Is there a place for that on television?
I would lay it all out for the writers.
David starts filling the whiteboard. This thing gets done, and he goes, this is fucking horrible. Erases the whole. I mean, it took us hours.
We said things that nowadays would be frowned upon.
We're writing about bad people, and we got to access those parts of ourselves.
The story comes out of those characters.
The garbage business is changing. Let me pick the energy up. I'm very tired.
That stuff is sort of my specialty because I was from Queens.
Carmela was something that HBO had discussed, but I went in wanting Dr. Melfi.
Mr. Soprano?
Jim had his own way of becoming Tony.
Unless you're really diligent, you can end up taking your work home, and as an actor, that's not always a great idea.
He probably quit the show every other day.
Did you see elements of yourself in Tony?
The Sopranos really redefined what people are willing and what people want to watch at home.
In that writer's room, we went through divorces and children being born and the stuff of life.
The more I did The Sopranos, I began to realize that the movie never ends. It goes on and on and on and on. It's always mesmerized me.
How are you doing? You okay, David?
Yeah, I'm just talking my hat off. As Tony says, remember when is the lowest form of conversation.
I want to remind you and everybody that we did a Westdoc episode now 4.5 years ago. It was a week into COVID, which we thought was going to be over in a week or two. Yeah. And you talked about starting your career and going to UCLA Film School. And I was looking back and thinking about that, and the fact that I think you quit, you left UCLA to go become an assistant editor at Goldwyn. But I'm wondering, when were you there?
I had finished my undergraduate education. I went out to UCLA for grad school, and I graduated from college in '77. And I think I was at UCLA in, I think, 79 or 80, something like that.
So were they still having those enormous screenings at Royce Hall of the student films at the end of the year?
They did. They did, and I screened mine there. I remember I didn't screen I never made a thesis film, but they used to make you do a Super 8 film first. And my Super 8 film got into a big film festival called, at the time, it was called Filmex. I don't know if you remember that. But it was a big film festival that they had at Century City. And somehow mine got in, which my teacher didn't really appreciate. He didn't like my film. So it got shown, but my teacher my professor wasn't my biggest booster.
He didn't mind that you got in the festival. He
didn't mind that I got into the festival. He just thought, this film? Really?
What was it about?
It was about pinball. Well, it was about the change from pinball to video games. That's what it was about. And I kind of couched it as kind of a first-person film noir. I had been reading The Little Sister by Raymond Chandler. So, I sort of did a first-person film noir narration over this musing of how pinball was losing out to video games.
And going back and looking again at your background, I was surprised. I don't think it came out in the first episode, but you have a degree from Yale in Japanese literature. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I studied when I was there. Japanese literature.
And what were you thinking that you were going to do?
Well, you have to understand that my dad was something of a Japanologist. I mean, when you're in college, I'm not sure you know or conscious of what you're going to do. You're just studying something, and there's a major, and you study it. But I grew up partially in Japan because my dad lived there for many years, though he was divorced from my mom. So I had affection for it, and also my dad was considered a kind of a big honcho. Post-war, he wrote the first popular nonfiction book about Japan. We didn't know very much about Japan at the time. And he had learned Japanese in order to be an interrogator during the war, had been there in the occupation, had been a correspondent there, and ended up spending a lot of his life there. So in a way, I was kind of following in his footsteps. But what happened was that at Yale, I caught the film bug. And rather than go into the family business, which was print journalism, I decided to go into the movies.
And we're all very thankful and glad that you did. I love the behind-the-scenes kind of film. And boy, if you're a Sopranos fan, this is kind of the ultimate pulling the curtain back in a way, isn't it? Were you a fan of the show?
Massive fan of the show. Yeah, I loved it. And I was one of those people who were like, don't schedule anything for Sunday night, because this wasn't a streaming show. This was, you got to be there Sunday night to watch it. And, a lot of restaurants remember people just deserting. Quick, give me my check, got to get home, watch The Sopranos. So, yeah, I was all over it. But I didn't pay that much attention to how it was made or how it was changing television. Not until I did this. And we were lucky enough to get some great stuff. I mean, one of the pleasures of doing a film like this is you get to explore. And thanks to the skill and perseverance of my producer Ophelia Haratunian and the rest of the team, they found some stuff that in the belly of the HBO archives and elsewhere that was great. I mean, French television had come over to memorialize the writers' room, so they had all this footage of the writers' room, which we were able to use. We found
it was very revealing.
It was super revealing, and then we found all of the not all. So there was one that was missing that was crucial, but almost all of the audition tapes. Wow! Like when you're planning The Sopranos, you don't know who you're going to cast, and you don't know, what you've got to see the choices, and then ultimately the choices that were made. That was really, really revealing.
What about releases? Was that a nightmare, or was
it was difficult, but we had to get.
You have two kinds.
We had to get a lot of them.
Auditions. You have to go find out who those actors are. Where are they today?
We did. We did.
And did you have to pay them?
Yeah, I think we paid them a sort of a one-size-fits-all fee.
And the actors, was everybody excited and say, "Oh, sure," or were there some that you had to twist their arm a little bit to talk?
There was some arm twisting sometimes, but most people were pretty engaged and delighted that a doc was being done.
And because this is for HBO, I assume you didn't have any problems with clips or anything like that. You could more or less use whatever you wanted.
No,
I'm making an assumption.
Because HBO came to me, if they had said, "And it's on you, Alex, to clear the clips," good luck with the lawyers at HBO, I think I may have passed. So yes, HBO was, helpful.
Talk about the lawyers of HBO.
Made it happen. HBO supported this obviously massively.
What was the most challenging part of this show? You're used to doing, people that don't want to talk to you, from, criminals and cops and politicians and bad guys, and here you have a bunch of terrific actors. What was the toughest part?
I think the toughest part, in a way, was staying true to the focus of the film, because I really did want to be true to my original intent, which was not to do a stone skipping exercise. I wanted to focus in on David, and beyond that, on both the origin story of how it got made, how personal it was to David, and then as the show ramped up, the creative enterprise, what was the central motor to that. And I just didn't want to do a greatest hits episode. So the hard part was to honor that and find my way through figuring out who I would interview, who I would regrettably either leave on the cutting room floor or not interview, in order to be able to get to the heart of the matter, which was the kind of initial the creative impulse.
Which has everything to do with his mother and his relationship with his mother. And the Nancy Marchand story was really also very revealing and touching and moving and surprising, because I knew who she was, but I didn't relate back to her earlier acting,
in Lou Grant.
Resume.
Yeah. With that role she played in Lou Grant as the sort of the Kay Graham character couldn't have been more different from the character she played in The Sopranos. But I was also very touched by that moment, person to person, when toward the end of season 1, when she was going to be killed by Tony, she says, she told David about her cancer and the fact that she was dying, and she said, "Just keep me working." And so they figured out a way to rewrite the end of the first season so that they'd keep her going. And they did. And they even did an episode which they had to film some of after she passed, even though she was in it. So it was a very moving experience to think about the show as both professionals who are acting roles, whether they be technical roles or literally acting roles, but also the people, the human beings, and the fact that David, as the showrunner, was kind of like the capo. He was kind of like Tony, and that he was the one who had to decide who was going to live and who was going to die. And because they were not just actors on a page, they were real people who had gotten used to working on the show over a number of years and had become part of the Sopranos family. But if there's too much yakking and not enough whacking, then you're not making the Sopranos.
Do you think he was the most stunned person of all at the enormous success of the show, or not? Because he didn't have that back. He didn't come from super, he had run, I looked up his credits on IMDb Pro, and he ran a couple of series and all that, but nothing that was high profile like
and
this.
He wasn't a showrunner on any. He was a showrunner, but he wasn't the creator on any of them. He was the showrunner for a season on Northern Exposure, which was a very successful show, but he was just kind of taking the reins. I think he was surprised because this was kind of the end of the line for him. If this didn't hit for him, that was it. He was going to take the money he had and just write spec scripts and hope that one.
Isn't that exactly what Gandolfini said too about the end of the line for him? So already, I don't know how old he was when he auditioned for this, but he must have been close to 50, I would guess, right?
Right, and he almost quit during his first audition. He said, "This is bullshit. I'm not doing it right. If you want me to come back, I'll come back." He walked out of his own audition, which seemed perfect now in retrospect for who he was. But yeah, David was at the end of the line. So I think it was true. Alex Sakharov, the cinematographer, director of photography for the first episode and many episodes, and also the last episode, remembers a conversation with David when he comes in during the middle of shooting the pilot and says to Alik, "Oh man, I don't know if is anybody going to watch this shit?" And Alik, both in retrospect, given the success and also at the time, was like, "Oh man, good script, bro. Don't worry about it. Keep going." And I think there was a lot of doubt. And I don't know that HBO knew. They thought they had something special, but you never know. And it became so special so fast, it just exploded.
And isn't there a part in your show where Chris Albrecht and Carolyn Strauss, they waited 10 months to give the green light after
They were
the
nervous. They were super nervous. And also, it was an expensive show to make because they were making it on location in New Jersey. They weren't doing second unit there. And cast was expensive. How they wanted to shoot it was expensive. They were gulping. And this was a fledgling network. So they took a long time to make that decision. And when they did, then they stuck to their guns. Except one time. And then they resolved it rather quickly, that college episode.
I love seeing the executives there, Chris, who I met when he was the doorman at the Improv in New York. This is true. This is absolutely true. Now I totally lost my train of thought, what I was going to say when I told that. I know what I wanted to say. I think this show is going to be your show about about Wise Guy, David Chase and The Sopranos. It's going to be a huge success for HBO, and I think millions of people are going to want to see this. But my own question is, I wonder how much of it is kind of inside baseball. Do people outside of the business, I thought everybody was fascinating and compelling, but do people outside of the business care as much about, what the DP was thinking or about the audition tapes and that sort of thing? I don't know.
I think they do. I think everybody has a fascination with how things work. How is a tennis ball made? How is a baseball made? How is a TV series made? And I think thanks to David and HBO and also the folks who spoke out, and some of the stuff we found, this is a pretty good evocation of what it's like to make a series like this. And I think people are interested in that. So yeah, I think they'll watch it. Not to mention the fact that a lot of people either have heard of The Sopranos, wish they watched it and wanted to watch it, or a lot of them have seen it and they want to know, oh my God, how was it that Michael Imperioli got cast as Christopher Moltisanti? So yeah, I think...
And it's going to introduce the show to a whole generation of young people that have heard about it but didn't watch it.
Yep.
Was there much conversation?
And it's funny. This show is funny. I mean, it's brutal, it's violent, but it's really funny. And I think David said, I know he said to me, he said, I could never decide. Was it a comedy or was it a drama? I could never decide. Because there's something about most of the characters in the film, with the exception of Tony, are totally unironic. They don't reflect upon themselves. They don't see outside themselves. So as a result, they're put in situations where they become utterly ridiculous. Like, when, Paulie Walnuts, Tony Sirico, gets lost in the snow. He loses his shoes. His perfectly coiffed hair is messed up. He as a character or as an actor doesn't see the humor in it at all. There's no irony for him. But we're all howling with laughter.
Was there much conversation in the making of or thinking about the violence involved in the show and the potential impact of violence like we see on this show and other shows, and the effect it might have on some people?
There was certainly discussion of it, a lot of discussion of it. But I think that the creators felt, and ultimately the HBO execs were persuaded to agree, the one time being the debate over the college episode, which we can talk about, was that these are mobsters we're talking about. And unless you're willing to show the violence, you're not being truthful to the kind of horrible people that they are in terms of what they do for a living. They kill people, and sometimes in very brutal ways. And so to the extent that you avoid that violence, you're avoiding telling a terrible truth. And I think that, I believe that's true.
So why, it's funny because in so many TV shows or films, you would say, if you're the producer, director, or the audience, who do you like? Mm-hmm. It's like a conversation in a way. I think it's a fair comparison of the Godfather film, where they're all kind of brutal, criminals too. But why are we compelled to tune into this and watch this show? Who do you like here? Because none of the characters are really warm and fuzzy.
They're not warm and fuzzy, but they're funny. And sometimes you hang out with them long enough, you end up liking them. Every time Jim Gandolfini as Tony comes on the screen, you like him. And in fact, the writers, I think, would play with that idea because they realize that, over the course of 2 or 3 episodes, you might come to like Tony or Jim as Tony so much that it was becoming unreal. And they would make sure that he would do something absolutely brutal to remind you what kind of guy this was. And what is it about that relationship that we have with people? We want to like them, but does that mean that we need, do we ignore what it is that they do? And what is it about liking people? Can you like somebody who does terrible things? All those things raise important and interesting questions, but it's a lot more interesting to me than the old white hats, black hats in the kind of, puritanical westerns that used to be made. There's the good guy. There's the bad guy. He's all good. He's all bad. I hope we know by the end the good guy's going to kill the bad guy. That's not life. It's just, pop culture morality. So the Sopranos invested in something different, which was this idea that we all live in the gray, and that has something to do with who you are as human beings, and also something to do with the kind of winner-takes-all culture that we've created in America. Because to some extent, David's show was a critique of America too. We shouldn't forget that.
What are you working on next?
Good question. I'm working on a doc about Elon Musk.
And who is that for?
It's for HBO here, plus a theatrical, and then Universal overseas. And then there's also a couple of fiction projects I hope to direct maybe next year.
And is Mr. Musk cooperating in your documentary?
Not so far.
But doesn't he know who you are?
He does. Rather famously, there was a moment where the project was announced, and Musk tweeted on X, "Gibney is a douche."
Oh, jeez.
To which
at least he's subtle, right?
To which I tweeted back, "Douche."
Do you drive a Tesla by chance?
No, I drive an electric car, but it's not a Tesla.
Are you doing like wall-to-wall interviews? Are you totally sopranoed out now?
Today is interview day, so yeah, I've been doing a lot of interviews, but I love talking about this because honestly, I had a ball doing this.
It's a great show. I loved every minute of it. I watched the entire thing, and I can't imagine it not being a huge success for HBO because it's built in. I mean, they know what they're going to see too, and it's wonderful. And I think you're absolutely right. I'm glad you didn't do, Sopranos' greatest hits, so to speak.
Right.
So thank you for taking the time, Alex. And
Chuck, always a pleasure.
Hammers it with a nail in the front door and closes it.